Greetings and salutations. Welcome to a conversation with Colin Moriarty. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined by my friend Mike Bithell.
Hello.
All the way from GDC here in San Francisco. Actually, you've been in the United States
Originally
for some weeks.
London.
Yes, originally London.
Yes.
But we discovered you only at game shows that we're all at together. So as far as I know, you don't actually live a life outside of E3 and GDC and all these things.
I am allowed out into sunlight for approximately 3 weeks a year. It's great.
So I want to thank you. It's Friday. So we're recording this on Friday, the Friday of GDC. So everything's pretty much waning now. Mm-hmm. I do want to thank you sincerely because I know how tired and exhausted you must be. GDC is very exhausting for developers and publishers as you're wheeling and dealing and making deals. And I hope that you had a lucrative and productive week.
It's been a good. We've been here 2 weeks. We did DICE as well.
Right. So you're ready to get the hell out of this place.
I am. But before I do, let's talk.
Let's talk about how bad it is. Well,
okay.
So I wanted to, for people that are not familiar with the series, this kind of mini series that we're trying to do, Colin Was Right is obviously starting, and you guys are really watching it and enjoying it. And that's great. But I don't want it to be a platform in which it's above reproach. I want people to come on and tell me why I'm wrong, or challenge ideas, or reinforce the ideas. And so you guys might have seen, depending on the order I publish these, Jason Schreier came on to talk about games journalism, and Adam Boyes came on to talk about why I was wrong about episode 2 of the show. Okay. And I specifically wanted to have you on not only to talk about indie gaming, because that's where you make your bread and butter. Obviously, for people that don't know, Mr. Bithell made Thomas Was Alone, which is a smash hit game, and Volume, another hit game. And it's worth noting that we do have a personal relationship, and we did have some financial, I guess, stuff with Volume right back in the day.
Oh, we sponsored the show.
Right, exactly. So you could take what we say with a grain of salt if you want, but I want to put that relationship out there. That Mike's a friend of mine.
No, that's fine.
All right. So what I'm always intrigued about with you, well, there's a lot of things actually that intrigue me about you. I think you're a really smart guy.
Thank you.
The common theme is that everyone I think on the show this week has a great mind for games, a great mind for other things. I wanted to call you on first because you're in the indie scene in the UK and Western Europe. Obviously, this is ubiquitous kind of global thing going on. But I think you can provide a really interesting perspective into what people in the games industry in Europe might feel about what's going on here, and I know that there was some, with Rami Ismail and some others, there's some fear about coming to the U.S. and all.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit about like what is going on in the last couple of months over there and how everyone's feeling?
How it's being perceived.
Yes.
So first, I said this like before we came on, like the big caveat: I'm a British guy. I understand the historical context of a British guy talking American politics. It's been fine for the last couple of hundred years. We're okay. Yeah. I think it's time. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We get, obviously, like with you guys, with international news, we get, very specific kind of bits. We often get the more extreme and exciting news, right? Because that's the stuff that plays. So there is, it's been a bit surprising to the UK. I think no one saw this coming, like the new presidency. Right.
Similar to Brexit, which everyone always assumed wouldn't happen as well.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of similarities, frankly, in all kinds of ways with that. It was really weird in the run up to Trump being elected. I remember I was tweeting because I have a lot of American friends and I'm in and out of the country. Like I was often kind of tweeting like, because a lot of my friends were like, oh, it's not going to happen. It can't happen. I was like, I remember us saying the same thing about Brexit, and a lot of the kind of the issues around polling and stuff. There's a lot of echoes in terms of how those two stories played out. But yeah, I think it was surprising. I think on a political level, a lot of unsurprisingly, a lot of the creative industry skews left. It's always forever thus, right?
Yes.
And games are no different. Also, Europe tends to skew, or historically has skewed to the left of America on a lot of stuff. That's shifting in quite extreme ways in some
countries. Right, with Marine Le Pen and what's going on in Germany as well, and Belgium.
Definitely. There's a really interesting kind of historical zeitgeist in Europe for very obvious reasons. There's no need to immediately jump to those those historical events, but like there's definitely a shadow in Europe of the right being perceived at the extreme as something to be worried about. So I think that's skewed Europe for the last 50, 60 years towards the left, and I think what we're seeing now is a very natural kind of swing back, and maybe in some cases that's going quite extremely to the right, definitely with Brexit, definitely with, as you said, Marine Le Pen and all that stuff, although I feel underqualified to talk too much about that. But I feel like I'm underqualified to talk about anything, to be completely honest. But yeah, it's... So I think there's just a general kind of surprise. I think that's the thing. I think everyone's processing it. I think the other thing is the frequency of news stories at the moment, right? it seems every day I wake up and there's some big news event happening in America. And what that's doing is actually, because these stories are interesting, it's meaning that American politics is dominating, at least in Britain, the news way more than it has historically. Like my knowledge of someone like Barack Obama was obviously the historic nature of his election in the first place. Some debates and stuff, some international policy decisions and debates around, wars and the role of America internationally. And honestly, that was about all that broke the surface. Like you saw a comedy sketch occasionally that would incorporate him, or he'd make an appearance on something, or you'd see like an animated GIF of him, or GIF. Please don't comment.
Yeah, depending on your
That's
persuasion.
probably the most controversial thing I've said in the last 5 minutes. But you would see this stuff, but I think the amount of focus happening is interesting. And then the other kind of key thing is, as someone who travels a lot, you think a lot about crossing borders and moving internationally, and it does cross your mind, the stuff that's being kind of talked about in terms of who can and can't come into the country. I definitely don't fit the profiles that are being affected more than me, so I kind of I'm very mindful of that, but it still plays on your mind. I travel a lot to countries where I need to get a visa, or where there is political complexity to getting in, and it plays on your mind. And for the longest time, traveling to America was just like catching a train somewhere. Like it was just, you go there, it's fine. Friends, may get held up, but it was definitely a kind of, it felt like a soft border, and that feels like that's shifting. And that's a weird thing. There's also a relationship with Britain, I think, because we consume so much American media. We sort of do feel connected with America,
right? Well, we're kindred for sure. I mean, for going back, as you said, since the war.
On the British, exactly, right. Yeah. Cheers for that, by the way. Yeah. On the kind of British side in our politics, there's this idea of the special relationship, which you talk to a lot of Americans, they never heard of the special relationship,
right? And what do you mean by that special relationship? Proper, capitalized word, special relationship, which is yes,
it's something that, as you say, from the Second World War onwards, there's very much been a push. I think was it a Reagan era kind of thing? It came like that term specifically. So
I think so. Reagan and why can't I think of her name?
Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah, Thatcher. Yeah.
So in British politics, British politicians have always tried to align themselves with the American politician. The idea being that they appear strong through that correlation, through that kind of that relationship. So that's one of the reasons that I think we politically always try and get our prime minister over to meet a president very quickly.
As happened with Theresa May not too long ago.
Correct. And I think because of the controversial nature of Donald Trump, that has had an effect. I mean, he's going to come over to the UK at some point. I publicly tweeted that I was at the protests of not him visiting, but he's
having a state visit.
He's getting a state visit. So the difference between that is obviously, of course, the leader of America should be able to come to the UK and meet our politicians. That's inevitable. The state visit, though, is a special level of meeting the Queen. Kind of, it's a massive sign of respect, and that would be where politically I would be questioning that.
You're cut off, yeah. I understand that.
But that's,
And Parliament, a lot of Parliament agrees with that. I was watching a lot of that debate, and
there was that weird moment where the Speaker of the House literally said he shouldn't be allowed in here, which was...
Yeah, it was interesting.
That's unprecedented, by the way. That's not
I love the way that guy talks, by the way. Just not when he's talking about whatever he screams out in between people saying things. I think he's saying people's names or something like that, but it's very passive. It sounds very passive-aggressive, like he's bored, he doesn't really want to be there.
He's very largely, I think, limited by his role there. I mean, we can talk about Parliament, but we can do that for an hour. That'd be awesome. But he's very constrained in terms of what he can and can't say, which is what makes the Trump statement so surprising.
Right.
So I think there's just a general kind of a reassessment and a kind of working out of what this means. I think it's very specifically an American issue because it's the American presidency, and I know that this is causing way more turmoil over here. But I think there are repercussions and echoes of that politically throughout the world, and as you say, there's the mirroring of things like Brexit, the rise of far right parties. And by the way, when I say far right, I do mean literally like nationalist.
The National Front is a far right party.
Yeah,
in France.
we're talking much further to the right of, say, mainstream Republicans.
Right.
It's not. It is. I'm using that word very carefully. So it's a weird time to be a lefty like me.
Right. No, I understand that. No, I agree with you. I was reading a bit about the French election, and they were making the caveat that there is a conservative running. But that Marine Le Pen is the National Front is a far right.
I think that's something that the American system, because you only realistically you only have two contenders.
Yeah, we have a binary system. Yeah.
There's you've got your Green parties, your Libertarians who kind of fill out the other two sides. But even then, I wouldn't. Would you describe the Libertarians as to the right of
the
Republicans?
Libertarians are to the right. They're considered even more to the right than a normal paleoconservative Republican. Yeah.
Okay.
Because they're for the abolishment of government, basically, as opposed to the small. Making it smaller.
Okay. So it's the complete abolition. I don't get libertarianism at all. There's libertarianism starting to come in the UK a bit, but I think mainly because of the consumption of American political stuff. But so it's no government.
Well, it's not complete anarchy, but it's where and when you can get rid of government, you should get rid of government. They don't.
That should be the objective.
Yeah, they don't talk about cutting the military by 10%. They talk about cutting it by 50%. They don't talk about the Gary Johnson, who ran for president, who I voted for, who got 3% of the vote. A little bit of a nut job, but their idea was basically cut the government in half. I mean, that's a significant, that would be $1.5 trillion worth of savings or something like that.
It's an interesting political
and I believe in some of that stuff, but we don't have to get down the rabbit hole. I consider myself libertarian socially. In other words, I believe that you should be able to do any drug you want, and it should be maybe illegal to buy it, or sell it, but it shouldn't be illegal to do it. I believe in even polygamy, legal prostitution, all that kind of stuff. Whatever consenting people want to do. That is a strain, right? That's a strain of American libertarianism that goes back to Jeffersonianism and all.
Yeah, that side of it's fair enough. Yeah.
So let's get into the brass tacks in terms of one of the things I'm really interested in is how this affects commerce, because and I think it affects it on multiple levels, and we can get into those levels. I think at the base level, 30,000 feet, you have this idea that, well, if people can't safely get into the United States or can't reliably get into the United States, and that stops them from coming to a show like GDC. Yeah. And for people that don't know, Game Developer Conference is interesting, and it's actually my favorite show. It was at IGN because I would just go through the book and be like, I would like to see this speech and this presentation. It's really fascinating. It's expensive, but you should try to get there one day if you're really into it, because you can sit in and be and Naughty Dog will be like, this is how we designed these characters.
It's not an announcement. It's I watched one the other day about how they render the characters in Street Fighter. It's amazing.
Yeah,
that's the stuff that, as a developer, I find that fascinating. I think the game audience is becoming more and more educated about how games are made, and they'd be into that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I've beaten it into the ground, but I actually remember my favorite presentation at all the GDCs was Insomniac did a one for Resistance 3 that was about where and why and how they place the Chimera, the enemies, in the maps, and they would go into the maps and show the design and be like, this is why a wave comes in, awesome. And when you kill this particular enemy, this makes this drop ship come in, and it's so super useful. Fascinating stuff. It's useful for you. To me, it's just nerdy, and I like it. Although a lot of it's over my head.
What's great historically, as well as those videos get saved. I had to do, I'm going to be very vague here, I had to do a specific AI job for something we're working on. I had to write some AI, essentially, and I hadn't done that kind of thing before, that specific element of AI programming before. And I could go back and find 3 AAA games I adored from the last 5 years that I know did that thing, and I could find the hour-long presentation from the guy who did that job on that, and just make notes, basically, and just do it.
Super useful library to make great games. So do you think the commercial ramifications are real? In other words, if there's let's say there's a Muslim British developer. In fact, I don't want to call him out specifically, but I heard rumblings of a somewhat prominent Muslim British developer before Trump that was even being kind of harassed when he would come to the United States to do business.
I think I know who you mean, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so, and I don't think he would mind saying, but it's not my thing to say.
No, absolutely.
So I imagine it's compounded now, and that must have real ramifications. If a person of color or a person of and obviously I'm right wing, I'm a conservative, so I tend on the say of borders should be safe and all that kind of stuff. But it has gone to an extreme that I'm certainly uncomfortable with, and I do wonder, just from a practical level, it affects people on a human level, but on a commercial level, since that's what we're talking about as games, certainly that must have a negative ramification.
For sure. I mean, it's worth saying when I talk about the heady days of about 6 months ago when traveling to the America felt like a train journey. That's me saying that as a white guy, right? I breezed through airport security, except for when I tried to take a steam box through Poland, and I had to explain to them what a steam, the little PC, and they didn't believe that a PC could be that small. So I had to then explain, well, Valve are doing this thing.
Go on the internet, go on NeoGAF.
Had to basically, pitch them. But so it's worth saying that I speak there from a position of privilege in terms of travel, that people have been being slowed down and being searched and stuff for years. I think it has to have an effect. I don't necessarily know the scale. I mean, it's worth noting, of course, that games are, one industry, and in terms of, makeup, of the economy of America, I don't know where we fit in or if we even register, but it will affect things, because the second you make someone less comfortable coming to your country, they'll come to your country less. They might not never come to your country. It might not mean that they never come, but it might mean that they make 2 less trips a year. And for me, every trip I take to America has a business reason. There's an interaction I need to have. There's someone I need to meet. I mean, I've just done DICE and GDC. I think we had upwards of about 30 meetings. Entirely possible that, if any one person hadn't been around, that would have had an enormous effect on my company, because I can't meet that person, I can't pitch them, I can't do business with that person. So yeah, I mean, it has impacts, definitely. I mean, personally, with my politics, that's definitely not the main problem with it. But there will be business connotations. It just affects things. It's weird. It's just a weird, surreal thing. I think SXSW is doing, South by Southwest is doing. I only ever read it. That's why I said SXSW. They're doing a concert, right, by some people. Everyone playing that concert are people who are unable to get into the country under the rules as they stood. They've been lifted now.
They've been lifted and they're being challenged in the court. Yeah.
So that's going to bounce back and forth a few times. But yeah, so that's this. They're organizing that. They're running a Kickstarter to fund it. What happens if those rules change back, and then those people can't come to the concert, and then you've got people? We all know how people feel when Kickstarters don't go the way they plan, right?
Oh my god.
And how does that affect things? And it seems really silly to talk about stuff like that, in the grand scheme of freedom of movement for people. But there will be several unforeseen circumstances. I think the biggest one is what I just said, though, in terms of, it's not so much the rules whenever they stand, but it's the unpredictability of the rules. There is a pace at which government is expected to work, and it seems like that's been broken a little bit.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. I agree. Yeah. And I think that, from that eagle eye view, it's interesting how, you're talking about your trip here to do business, presumably with American companies, or at least this is where the confluence of everyone from around the world's coming. But I'm fascinated by this.
I'm taking jobs overseas.
Not only with, you're coming here, you're spending your money on hotels and food and stuff that's good for our kind of larger economy. But the idea that a British developer or a developer from France or wherever around the world, it could be anywhere, might not be comfortable coming here doing business with an American company to publish a game, for instance, in which the publisher will then be in Eastern Europe or something like that.
And also the other way, right? What if an American businessman woman wants to go over to the UK, say, to come to me and try and get the complete opposite direction, right? And bring in money and jobs into America. If they're not if for a 2-week trip, at the current time, a 2-week trip, the entire political landscape could change and they might not be able to get back in.
Right.
And we've seen loads of reports of that kind of thing happening, right? Or at least, severe delays that are scary.
People, I remember one of the things that set me over the edge was a translator, an Iraqi translator that helped the American military that then was allowed into the United States because of his service was stopped. And I'm like, that's just not acceptable to me.
That's such an extremely offensive example.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. A man who risked everything probably and would be killed if he went back to Iraq is, so that was a problem for me. And I like it. I like thinking about it on that level, but then on the lower level, kind of more in the trenches, I'm kind of curious what you think about the politicization of the industry and how it's always been political. I did an episode about how political, just to call them out, people want to watch them because this is kind of what we're talking about. Episode 4 was politics, social issues in video games. And then episode 5 was the gaming industry versus Donald Trump, which was a popular one about Donald Trump's policies with immigration and also with tariffs and protectionism. You guys can check those out if you want, but are you comfortable with the politicization, the hyper politicization of the gaming industry, with the developers being very vocal, media being very vocal, YouTubers being very vocal? It seems to me to be a calamitous kind of situation, because I feel like it's going to, that will have a real effect on relationships and commerce and all the rest. And I'm wondering if it's a positive thing.
It's a really interesting question, and it's a nuanced one, right? That's the thing. I guess, are we starting from this point that everything is political? Is that something we're starting from?
Because I absolutely, I think it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you're talking specifically about the discourse. My view is, I think politics are a fascinating lens to talk about and look at games. I think we can learn a lot about games. I think make games better. As a developer, that's my thing. Is I want games to be better, and I want games to be a more successful business. I think those are the two. Those are the two kind of things that drive me and what we do. And I think both of those, in theory, having better discussions about games, I think is useful. I think in terms of, they're art and they should be treated like art. And I think often as an industry, we want games to be considered art because we know that that's a highfalutin thing that will make us less embarrassed when we talk about playing them at parties with people who don't play games.
Right.
Like it's like
they mean more than you think.
Yeah, exactly. Like actually, video games are art is something that I've definitely said to people at parties and then been very unpopular at parties. But that comes with it that people will talk about games in a way that makes you uncomfortable in the same way as, any art, they will talk about through that lens. Honestly, I think everyone's talking politics more than they were. I think that's just a trend that's occurred. I think as well, the specific means by which we consume media pushes us towards going down our channel, right? Like finding people who agree with us and communicating with them and reading them and knowing them. I actually have to actively work now to get my internet experience to have viewpoints that are not like laser focused on my political views, because these tools they give you what you want, right?
Exactly.
That's what they're designed for. So I think I don't know how much of it is an illusion of that stuff. I'm pretty sure websites still exist that don't talk politics in games, but I don't like telling people not to talk about something. You know what I mean? That's where it comes down to for me is I think a conversation around politics in games is awesome. I think you can ignore that conversation. I think you can disagree vocally with that conversation. It's absolutely someone's right to do that. But I don't think you can say that conversation shouldn't take place. That's where my line in the sand is. But I hear you, and especially as someone with kind of, I guess, a minority political opinion in the games media,
sphere,
right?
Yeah.
Like that, I can understand the frustration that must cause. I'm surprised we don't have. I mean, I guess we do, but like more people offering that opinion. Just given that we do in other medium, like if there's definitely like film sites that have a more right leaning bent.
Right.
I'm surprised there isn't that with games, but I suspect that given again the way traffic is funneled around the internet, those things would very quickly swing very right. Like
right. Of course.
So
of course.
I don't know the answer to your question. And like all political stuff, because I share the politics of a lot of that stuff, I'm probably blind to it, right? Because you don't see politics if it agrees with you. So I suspect a lot of what you're talking about, I don't see because I agree with it.
Right. I think
it's a problem.
It is. I mean, it's just the natural state. It's not as if you were
the human biases. We can't help it.
Exactly. And a lot of people are saying, like, well, some people are mad about it, but some people are like, "Oh, you're very, Colin, you're impressive when you debate politics and stuff." And I'm like, you have to understand that I probably wouldn't be if I didn't always have to defend myself. So like, I've been doing this for many years.
You've been that guy in the pub who's had to have this conversation.
Exactly.
Right?
I mean, I was, when I was senior editor at IGN, I mean, I was writing conservative pieces or whatever. But I was the only one. I am the only one.
So I'm actually interested in your opinion. So what would you like to see more of? That's probably the constructive way of kind of looking at it.
I think it's funny because I like the end product is great to me. Like, one of the pieces was about that, where I was defending Gone Home. I was defending even Depression Quest and all these games that are lightning rods.
Lefty, right?
Right, exactly. That are light.
Yeah, they all have themes and characters which appeal to a liberal kind of audience.
Right, and I think that they're just real. Like I have depression. Like, and that's I never played.
That's not a liberal issue.
No, it's a human issue, and it's like. I like the idea. To me, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and that's what I'm trying to tell everyone. Where these things, I am concerned about the argument that I'm exercising my free speech by criticizing this thing, right? And I'm like, that's great, that's fine, but I feel like there's a tone in some, and mostly left-wing criticism of things that is not like person on right or game on right or whatever saying this, and they're like, we don't like that. What it is like, I say this and they're like, you can't do that. That's a different kind of argument.
That's where I lose interest in stuff is like if anyone's blocking someone else from I'm. But again, obviously, this is I feel the need to say like again I'm a financially comfortable, privileged white guy, so like there's a certain
these caveats are important.
So but I think in terms of media criticism, nothing should be off the table. But I also think in terms of games, I think there are lines. But I do think that crap is crap. And I do think like if a game that it's not my style to name and shame other people's games, but like there have been examples of games that have actively sold themselves as subversive, screw political correctness kind of games, and they've not done so well because they were crap games that played badly, right?
Right.
Or actually that the kind of the politics of them were kind of juvenile or just boring. Like, so I do think, I'm trying to think of an example of like a really good right-leaning game.
I mean, honestly, like I always looked at Grand Theft Auto as right-leaning.
That's interesting. That's a possible read of that game
because I think it's satirical about about America and about what Vice City in Florida. And
but
all
it is
that,
still
but it is
conservative in its kind of. You're a small businessman, right?
I mean, to me, it's very conservative in the fact that like this is violent, this is what it is. We do what we do. We kill prostitutes. We do all these things. And I'm not saying right wing people kill prostitutes. What I'm saying is like that's what we do.
Just as a piece of text comes up on the screen, like
a scrolling marquee. But to me, I always look at Grand Theft Auto and I look at Rockstar and I look at. I mean, I don't know the house rules from a hole in the wall, but I look at that as a whole moderate but right wing kind of operation.
There are a lot of jokes in GTA games that do skew kind of liberal politics. Like the latest one definitely had. I remember some like jokes about feminism and jokes about. I don't think I think they've definitely done homophobic jokes in the past, or what I would consider, again, that's right. It's all perspectives. What I would consider homophobic jokes. I love GTA, but that's an interesting read of GTA.
Well, that's the thing, right, Mike? Is that it's so cleverly done that you don't think about it on the political paradigm. It just exists
because it's a great video game,
right? And it's clever and it's smart and it's well written and all those kinds of things. It's the way what people always say about like. I think South Park is clearly a right-wing show, and I think Family Guy is clearly a right-wing show. Yes. And I think that the interesting thing is that I don't think that the creators of Family Guy or South Park are right-wing. I think that it just comes off as counterculture, which is becoming increasingly right-wing in a weird way. Like the whole argument that
culture is the
argument
leaning left. Right?
I went on a political show earlier this week that's going up next week down in LA, and they asked, we were talking about. He asked like, do you agree that? With this notion that actually right-wing politics is like punk rock today, like the idea that like because in this it's this interesting idea. I don't agree with it, but it is this interesting notion that the normalization post like flower hippie child kind of thing going on in the 60s was a Republican era or a conservative era in the 70s and 80s that gave rise to punk rock, that gave rise to new wave, that gave rise to all these things that were left-wing counterculture to what was going on there, and now the culture is left wing. Therefore, inherently, the counterculture must be right wing, which makes
it's an interesting logical part.
It's strange.
I mean, my counter to that would be that like American left wing is definitely definitely to the right of left wing. Like if Obama were to run in the UK, he would be running for the right wing party in the UK. He would be a conservative,
as opposed to Labour.
He would not be Labour.
Right.
Like he was definite. Like American politics, because very fiscally conservative American politics generally. Like it skews in that direction. So yeah, to me, like when Bernie Sanders is president, we'll talk about the left.
Right. He's more in line with your paradigm, your political paradigm.
He's more in line, I think, with what a left-wing politician in Europe would be.
Right.
We actually, I mean, like the current leader of Labour, who's our equivalent of the Democratic Party, like they are. That's a guy, Jeremy Corbyn, who is super to the left, like to the point where I'm not completely sure this is a priority for us as a nation. Like I'm trying to think of some examples, but his rhetoric is incredibly left wing. But yeah, so it's. I'm not sure. I don't think the left dominates to the extent that, like, say, Reagan-esque politics did in that period.
Right.
But like, I hear it. I think it's a counterculture. I think that's the thing. I think we live in an era of multiple cultures. That's it sounds wrong, but like we are microcultures, right? Like we're all in our little bubbles, and it's very hard to see out of that. So punk rock only was kind of necessary and discussed because it came about in a time where, like in the UK, there were 4 TV channels, right? And punk rock would be there was like one show that kind of showcased punk rock on British television, so it was a niche. It was a niche within a culture that was very homogenized. Whereas now, like, there are things that are massive. And there are games that are massive. I saw. I think I was watching one of your shows actually, and Greg talks about League of Legends, like someone a cabbie having a League of Legends like toy in his car or something.
Oh yeah.
You've never seen it?
Yeah.
And it's like League of Legends is enormous. It's bigger than any of my games will ever be. And I've never played it, and I couldn't name a character in it. And it's like, and if games, which I consider myself, knowledgeable about, if I'm that blind on bits of that culture, what chance do I have of like larger culture, right? Like it's So I'm not sure. I don't necessarily agree with the analogy. I think we're all countercultures now. I think that's just there is no mainstream culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I've seen this argument presented in the last couple of weeks, and I think it's thought provoking, but I don't think that the dust is settled in such a way.
Well, that's it. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Because I certainly would never think of the conservative thing as being any
wish
counterculture.
they were punk rock.
Hence the name conservative. It's reactionary inherently. But I want to let's get down to the nitty gritty now about something in particular. Specifically with the game 2064 Read Only Memories and what happened on Twitter, and I'm sure you're familiar with that, with the where they said that they didn't want Trump supporters buying their game. That to me seemed corrosive. That seemed to me to be a bridge too far, where I was like, well, you can do whatever you want. You can literally say, I don't want white people buying my game. I don't want black people buying my game. I don't want. But to me, I'm like, but what is the point of that particular message? Because I make the argument that. God, who was I talking to? Because I wanted specifically. Oh, I was talking about just what Jeremy Dunham from Psionics was on to talk about Rocket League, and I think it was him, and I was saying we were talking about something political, I think, but I'm like, it's safe to assume that half your audience is probably independent or conservative. So, and not that they're being political, not that most companies are being political, but I'm like, conservatives do play games. People that voted for Trump play video games. People that are pro-life play video games. People that are religious play video games, and I'm like. Are we getting to close to crossing a line that is in bad taste that would alienate a massive group of your audience in the biggest market in the world for your games? And is that something that should be concerning, or is that you kind of have to let your flag fly and kind of, the consequences be damned? Like, what's your stance on that?
Well, I mean, in that specific example, I'm buddies with a lot of those guys, and I think they're awesome and very lovely people. It's not the decision. It's not the decision I would take, although I think I've taken similar decisions like in the past. I think I don't, obviously not on this issue because this issue wasn't an issue till very recently. But like I think I've said that he who was out sin cast the first stone, right? Like I think I've said publicly, like I've said something along those lines. I don't think quite as strongly, but like I've definitely talked about not wanting. I can't remember the stance, but anyway, it was so that caveat because someone will find it on Twitter. Yeah. I've definitely said something along those lines. It's not kind of how we talk about stuff. Partially because I don't think our games. At least the games we're making right now, Volume was definitely political.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's Robin Hood.
It was, and in terms of its like meta narrative about the rise of its villain, people have certainly pointed out that that's no longer quite as science fiction in terms of how he does it. I mean,
you were very prescient.
He was. So our baddie in our game used some of the flaws in the British political situation to rise to power, and that's Anyway. So no, I don't. I'm okay with people who politically disagree with me playing stuff I make. I have the arrogance to hope that maybe something I make convinces them at least a little bit of my argument. So I think there's two sides to this. I think there's the business side, and I think there's the kind of the emotional human side. On the business level, you're 100% correct. Like if you make anyone dislike you, then you are losing a customer. If you show disrespect to an audience member, they won't buy your stuff. That goes without saying. It's obviously a thing. It's why I try not to be rude to people at events. I do it because I'm a nice person, hopefully. But like I'm not gonna cut a queue because that's 5 people who won't buy my game anymore. And that's the right way. That keeps us honest, and as an industry, like, the fact that there are repercussions to, I'm thinking of like, business practices people don't like, people will vote with a wallet and not take part in buying future stuff. So yes, inevitably, if you say any political stance, you'll lose a customer. I would also say though, if you go on Twitter and say you don't like a TV show that someone likes, you'll lose a customer. Right. If you go on Twitter and say you don't like, I've had people screenshot me images of them pirating my game because of like I mentioned I didn't like a specific band or something like that. Definitely, some people's lines are, but I think absolutely, telling people that because of their democratic choice, you don't want them as a customer. Yeah, you will lose that person, and I don't blame the person who wants to step away because they're like, well, I don't want to. If that's how you feel about me as a customer, I don't want to do business with you. That said, there's the other side, there's the human side. And I think if it comes down to a very personal responsibility and a very personal choice. I think all of us have views on how we want our work to be experienced in the world. I think everyone has. I'm trying to think of examples here, but like maybe a country in the world which you think is genuinely, I'm not talking about, definitely not America at this point, but genuinely like a terrifying country where awful things are happening. You might not want to do business in that country. You make those kind of personal choices about things you don't want to do or do want to do as a business based on, often not on just pure capitalism. It's more of a gut feeling. Things you don't want to do. There's definitely business practices in games. I'm not going to name any of them in case in 10 years we do it, but like there's definitely business practices in games that I look at and go, I don't think that's cool. I don't think that's the way I want to kind of treat customers. So I make that choice, and I would definitely make more money if I did make those choices. But I decide, we're in this for the long game. We want to build up the relationship, so we're going to treat people differently. So I can understand how you get from there to if you are genuinely very strongly concerned about Donald Trump as a president, I can understand the emotional way you get there. It's very tough to comment on because it's not my country and it's not something that's affecting me directly. I think it's the right of any creator to state their political opinion and stand by it. It wouldn't be my choice, but I absolutely respect them for taking that stance, and they'll probably sell some less copies. They'll probably sell more with certain people as well.
I actually think it was a shrewd marketing decision because it's preaching to a choir that was probably going to buy the games anyway, which was something another person on this series made, which I think is a great point. Because my question to them was, because I've been affected by splash damage basically by my proximity to the Republican Party and my proximity to conservatism, even though I didn't vote for Donald Trump. And even in the primary, I voted for John Kasich because I thought he was a normal person. But like just being,
John Kasich played very well in Europe.
Did he?
Yeah,
like he's very homegrown kind of Midwest guy.
He just he was like I didn't know enough about his politics because obviously I wasn't doing that level of research because I didn't have a vote in it. But like he came across very well. He came across as like he had right wing politics, but like he seemed like a good man,
a normal person. Yeah. I mean I can relate to what you're saying because we own a business and obviously out of the four of the founders I'm the only political person and I'm very outspoken and very loud, and to the guys' credit they never really asked me to stop ever. And the same thing with IGN,
very much so publicly, right? Like your Twitter avatar is
is the Gadsden flag, which unfortunately is conflated sometimes with far right politics, but I put it there because it's from the revolution. It was our flag in the revolution.
For sure, but even the act of doing that,
right.
You understand its political. So you're making a choice in a statement,
right? Exactly.
And I guess you're losing viewers as a result.
Yeah,
right?
well, I think it goes both ways. Like I think Greg's even made the argument when we've talked about it because I've expressed regret to the guys in the past where I'm like I have to be this way. Like this is the only way I can be. And I'm sorry if it somehow damages our brand, but Greg's always made the contention, and I think it's true that we have a fair-minded audience because the hardcore people that stay are fair-minded. They understand that doesn't paint the whole picture. That doesn't paint who I am. That doesn't
You're
paint
not just a political opinion,
right? Exactly. There's more to that we don't really want people that have closed minds in our audience anyway. And we have the luxury of saying that because we are largely fan-funded and we are wildly profitable and growing every day. So like it's working. And so I think he makes the argument, and I appreciate it, that we might shed some people, but we actually retain more people and more people come through the door. And the one piece of feedback I've gotten, which I think is interesting, and I'm trying to relay to some of my more liberal friends, is there's a lot of me out there, and they don't feel like they're represented or that they can safely say that they voted for Trump, for instance, even though I didn't. That there are millions of
definitely did, right? Like that's it.
Yeah, exactly. And millions of them play video games.
Do you have the idea of a shy conservative? Is that something that's been described?
Right. Yeah, the shy Tory idea.
Yeah.
Which we talked about, in the months leading up. We actually did a whole show about it, and people think it was a pretty predictive episode because I'm like, I think Trump's going to lose, but this is going to be way closer than you think it is because there are people that are afraid to admit that they're voting for Trump.
Well, 538 were ringing that bell for months, and no one was listening.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. They said that
and misquoting their statistics and implying. Right. And people are rubbish with statistics. That's the other thing.
Well, that was the whole thing. As
someone who codes variables and statistics every day, I know what a 30% chance looks like. Much more common than I think that's what they were giving him towards the end. I think that's fair enough. I think there is. You can definitely draw a line between how you talk about politics publicly and how these guys did. I think obviously. I don't think you've said anything quite that divisive, but you're not a big Hillary Clinton fan, are you? I know that.
I love Hillary Clinton.
Yeah,
but I try to be. I guess
your line is that you've not said it about the the viewers, right?
No. I mean, I've had a little bit of a tip. I think with some of our more socialist-minded viewers that voted for Sanders simply because I just think he's a good man. I think he's an honest man, but I think he's out of whack or whatever. But it's never a personal attack. I get how a person can support Sanders, but I get how a person can support Trump, and I actually know some of them. You know, like where I come from on Long Island, they voted for Trump. You know, even and that breaks the mold, and that's why I try to explain.
Presumably, you have to come from a starting point that, I mean, how much of the popular vote did he get? 40.
He got it was 62 million to 65 million. So I think it was 40. I don't know.
They can't all be evil, right? Like no. I don't want to believe that's the case. They prioritize political issues in a way that I probably disagree with, but they're not evil bad people, these people necessarily. No, sorry, I shouldn't add the caveat necessarily. They're definitely not all evil people.
Right. A lot of those people swung the election of Obama 4 years ago. So
yeah, no, absolutely. So I think there's a I think what I'm saying is I think that's a gradient. I think we all live in an era where, the audience and the fans can see us in public, and a lot of people keep politics completely out of the way they present themselves publicly. I imagine a lot of people don't care about politics the way you and I do. Right. They don't think about it as much. But I think that there is the downside, and there is the upside, I guess, as well, of you see us for who we are politically, and yeah, I definitely I don't think people following me on Twitter have any confusion as to my politics, and I'm sure I've lost fans or players because of that, and that's sort of the way it is, and I think I don't want to be silent publicly. I'm sure you don't want to be publicly silent.
I can't.
You can't do it. It's not in your makeup, right? I'm the same. So I think that I think we just have to accept that, and I think, we all have our line on that gradient, and for me, I think we're in similar positions, just on different sides of that.
Well, that's the thing and that's kind of where I start off with the 2064 thing and why I wanted to write about it. The guy's name's Matt Kahn, right? Is that?
Yeah, and he is love. Have you met Matt?
I think I met him in person, but we corresponded via email because he gave me comments, and he was really nice and really friendly and thanked me. Actually, I think he felt like he was treated fair in the video, which I appreciate because that was my goal. Because the thing that I'm coming to terms with where, Facebook's a great example where everyone's losing their minds on Facebook with the memes and everyone's kind of unfriending people and stuff like that. And I'm like, what happened to the point where you and I are friends, right? We don't agree politically. We come from different countries, but we're friends. We break bread. We sit down. We do whatever it is. And I'm like, why is that a lost art? Or why is that becoming such a hard thing for people to imagine? I would never not buy a game from you because you are a liberal. And to me, I just wish everyone was a little more rational. I think you can look at the 5% on either extreme and be like, we want to cut them off and remove them, the alt-right, whatever, the neo-Nazis, and kind of these people still running around with hammer and sickles in their Twitter accounts. Stuff it's like, all right, we can probably cut you out and get you out of normal discourse, but we can smush everyone else together and realize that we have a lot of common goals and a lot of common cause. And if you just sat 10 people at a table with different political views and took it all out and they just had a conversation about family or TV or something like that, you'd realize everyone's kind of on the same level.
That's that's the assumption that American democracy is based on, right? The American democracy was never built around this idea that it's very hard to talk about British democracy because it doesn't really exist. But American democracy, because we have just so many weird political quirks that sort of mean, you could argue whether we actually have a democracy. But the American democracy, there was an assumption that the two people would speak with differing opinions, or multiple people in the past, and you wouldn't agree with stuff, but you'd find compromise, and you had a lot more party switching as well. If you go way back, right, people were jumping with different parties and finding different allegiances. It's a shame that's been lost. I think also, though, a lot of the conversation has become more extreme, and I think. Yeah, it's a weird one. I think the stakes are really high as well. We are at a point in time where there are these massive issues that are really important. Things like global warming. Global warming is not an issue that you can compromise on, right? Either you think it's real and we need to fix it now, and we don't have a choice, or you think it's made up and we absolutely shouldn't waste all these resources that could be used on something else fixing a phantom problem. Those two viewpoints, I'm not sure where the middle ground lies there. So I don't know if that's, everyone thinks they're always in a very important era in history because we're massively egotistical creatures. But it does feel like a moment where things like that, a lot of social issues that, these are life and death issues in a lot of cases. That the stuff that social liberalism, right? I'm also fiscally liberal, which is we won't go down that road because there will be
yeah, you and I won't agree.
We won't agree. We're not going to find our common ground there. But like social liberalism, live and let live kind of stuff.
Which is where you and I agree.
Which is where absolutely we agree, and where I think it's harder to find common ground with people who aren't, in my case, because I feel very strongly about that stuff. But that is life and death. That there are people who and literal life and death. There are people who are in very dangerous situations and are made to. There's a lot of suicide within certain groups. There's a lot of violence towards certain groups. That's a big fight, and again, that's one that it feels kind of twee for you and I to say, well, let's all just sit down and chat this through. And it's like, no, people are actually like in real trouble. So I think those things kind of, a combination of those kind of issues, those social issues that are really important and serious in people's lives, and also the enormity of issues like global warming and international terrorism and things like this that are very hard to have a middle of the road opinion on. I think that does push people away from each other. I don't know how to solve that problem. I hope we do.
I do too, because I'd like to see a situation where, I often think about like, what if at GamerX isn't a good example, but what if at like a GDC, a big 2064 fan, and it's just a kind of a random thing that would never happen because you'd never see it. But a guy wearing a "Make America Great Again" hat on, big fan of 2064 regional memories. He voted for Trump. He wants to go up to the Matt Con and shake his hand and be like, "I really appreciate it and love your game." To me, that's like a situation that's simply not possible, because
I think if that happened, I think Matt would give him a big hug. I genuinely do.
You think so?
I think so. I think Matt's a lovely guy. But I can't speak for Matt. Matt, please by all means let me know if I'm wrong on that. But like, I mean it's a sad thing. It's a weird thing because the hat's a great example of something that just became so strongly politicized and it meant something beyond merch, right? Like, as politicians always have, not so much in the UK because we have limitations on how much money people can spend on campaigns, but fundraising obviously massively important to like a presidential campaign, simply because of the scales involved and the enormity of your country. Like, it would be like if you had someone running for just one state. That's obviously a much smaller kind of a governor or something. That would be a much smaller race. But that became more than a merch, right? Everyone has bumper stickers of Obama or whatever, or there has to be a Barack Obama hat, right? That must exist. Yeah. But the Make America Great thing, that became a much bigger statement, and I think meant something. And I think there was a defiance to it as well, right? In terms of how it was. I think both the left kind of was uncomfortable with it, but I think also the right, to some extent, the people wearing it enjoy that notoriety, right? If
provocation.
It is a provocation, and not necessarily in like an extreme way, but just like, it was really interesting as someone who's obsessed with language, watching the word deplorable. First of all, become part of American dialogue in a way that I'd not heard the word deplorable used since the 18th century or whatever. But to see that used and then kind of claimed back essentially by the right, and you often would see people describe themselves as deplorable, right? So there is. I don't think the guy who shows up to GDC with a Make America Great Again hat necessarily showed up with absolutely pure intentions of inspiring a dialogue.
That's absolutely fair. Sure. So I think sure.
But it shows the polarization of these kind of images and choices that we're making in terms of how we communicate. So it's. I don't know. You know what? I don't think we're going to fix democracy in
not in this conversation. Right? I don't think that's conversation. Yeah. I think the one place I want to get. I would agree with you that I think the arts and entertainment and writing and all those kinds of things naturally attract more bohemian left-wing kind of types that are willing to forego financial security or willing to forego the normalcy of life.
Well, just to be a dictionary pedant, if you are by your nature a conservative person, you're not necessarily going to create the next interesting twist or inventive so Make America Great Again. The past tense is very important in that sentence, right? The word backwards has negative connotations and ones that I don't mean, but it's looking back with nostalgia, right? And while nostalgia is important let's use video games, right? Nostalgia is massive in video games. Pixel art's brilliant, but pixel art nowadays doesn't look the way pixel art looked in the SNES era. If it did, your game wouldn't sell.
Right.
So it's like, I think there are naturally that creation of new things I think there is something there is a correlation. I don't think there's a causality, but I think there is a correlation with left-leaning thought.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's why I've always kind of taken for granted that everyone's like, well, where are all the conservatives in games media? And I'm like, well, they don't really exist. Like I'm really one of the only ones.
Is that also because of the where gamers come from in terms of like the cities? Like it seems, again, out of my depth in terms of American politics, but it seems that there is a left lean towards cities and a right lean towards
the
rural
suburban
areas.
and rural areas. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's just a volume game. I think gamers exist on farms in Wyoming, and I think gamers exist in Los Angeles. But I think that there's just more people in Los Angeles than there are people in Wyoming, and so I think that that's the way it works. But the one thing that always, I want to get to a more politically comfortable place, I think, and I always speak from, and it sounds like I'm like crying about it, but I'm really not. But I want to give people an interesting perspective that they don't maybe often get, which is that I am a conservative person in the video game industry. And I actually have pretty socially liberal views, and I'm actually very moderate.
I don't think you would have been able to stick it out this long if you didn't. Right?
No, exactly. But that's the thing is like, and maybe it's just my perspective, but like I have a real admiration of the pro-life movement. I don't agree with them. I was pro-life at one time, and actually compelling arguments in a debate changed my mind when I was in college about being pro-life. And I was like, no, that you're right, and I'm pro-choice now. But I respect that, and I would love it for a journalist to be comfortable, to be like, I'm a pro-life Christian, for instance. I still play and enjoy video games. I still have a valid point of view. I don't need to be attacked for this any more than the person on the left needs to be attacked for their more socialist or fiscally liberal views. And I want to get to a more comfortable place. And the reason I say that is because, not so much in media, where I think they're more moderates than people think, but in development and publishing, I'm saying there's not hundreds of people that have said this to me, but people have stopped me. People have DM'd me, emailed me, and been like, I'm a conservative, and I would never say that. And we're talking about people at the top, and we're talking about people at the bottom, and everywhere in between. At GDC was the first time, as I told a story already, about a guy pulling me off of a line and being like, I'm not going to say the studio, but I work at a studio, and I'm pretty somewhat, and I'm a Republican, and I really appreciate what you're doing. And I would never say, and I remember him saying something like, I would never say that to anyone though. And I'm like, but that's so fucked up. It's like they do exist. There are Republican programmers, there are Republican artists, there are Republican writers, and they have value to add too.
There is an interesting, we talked about the correlation. There is definitely a correlation between conservatism and being very good at maths. That definitely does come up, and obviously that's a skill set. I'm speaking in stereotypes, which is very, very unliberal of me. But
sometimes like, broad strokes illustrate.
Yeah, but there's definitely, and I guess my counter to that would be that you have to be very. I'm sure people can see the cogs whirring occasionally with some of my answers. Like as a liberal, I'm definitely mannering my speech to to be polite and to communicate better. But so I do wonder how many there's definitely, I know lots of liberal friends who keep their politics off of Twitter or interviews or being in public. I do to an extent. I don't tend to overshare politically anymore. I definitely did when I was younger. But I do hear you, and it would be great if we could all have conversations. But I think these issues, they're just very strong. The pro-life thing is very weird for me because we just don't have that debate it definitely still exists in Ireland, but in England where I live, it's like it's not a political debate at all. It's just become locked in as like, well, that's just how it is.
Right. And I actually think it's mostly that way too, but I'd only bring up that issue because it's
very divisive, right?
It is divisive, but it's also, I feel like, principled. And it's the same principle that allows us to support transgender rights, really. It's the right of it's not something I agree with, but for someone to stand on a hill and say like, I believe in this unborn baby's right to live, is not something that they should be attacked for. I just weigh the two things and say like, well, the woman's already alive. That's the only, that's kind of like that's kind of,
if you could somehow separate those two things, I think we'd all be pro both things.
Right, exactly. But I look at their heart.
That's not how society or biology works.
Exactly. Right? But I look at the heart of the matter, right? And I try to be like, well, because I do try to see the positive in people. And I know that I'm known as being very curmudgeonly and stuff like that. And I am. But I try to see, like, when I saw the Bernie Sanders movement, I'm like, well, these are young, disaffected people that are desperate. By the way, that desperation is similar to the people that voted for Trump. I know no one wants to hear that. Like, the economic plans of the two, when it comes to trade, are identical.
Well, I mean, that was the funny thing, watching his, forgive me, the address he did.
State of the Union?
Is that State of the Union?
Just a few days ago?
Yeah. Like when he was talking about the TTP, and it's like, that's a lefty thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That's why he's hard.
There's that moment where you're like, as a liberal, we like that though. We wanted to get rid of the TTP. Yeah. That's it.
Exactly, but that's the thing is that because it's so politicized in games and everywhere, people can't look at these issues and be like, well, actually, Bernie Sanders and Bernie Sanders is a protectionist, and so is Donald Trump.
Very protectionist, right? and to an extent that I was like, but yeah.
Exactly. So I'm like, but they're like, but no one wants to find the common ground. And so I always just try to see in the person's heart. So when I just use pro-life as an example. I'm like, that person thinks that they're doing the right thing. They're not trying to hurt anyone. They're trying to protect someone. I just think that they're wrong and they're hurting the wrong person.
Well, that's the first thing you learn if you read anything from like there's Disney writers of, I can't remember where I saw it, but a book by a Disney writer I read. The villain Scar thinks he's doing the right thing by the kingdom. Like, and I say that, I'm definitely not saying, a Republican is a villain or a pro-lifer is a villain, but like, we all think we're in the right. No one wakes up in the morning and goes, I'm going to really like mess with the world today. I'm going to make there are psychopaths. There are of course. Sociopaths. I'm definitely not, I'm not qualified to call anyone anything in mental health terms, but like, there are people who probably do wake up with those kind of thoughts, but the vast majority of us have differing solutions to problems. That's all it is. I do think there are lines crossed, especially on the socially liberal stuff, like in terms of like, your respect for other people. That's where it gets grey for me and muddy. Like, me too. But yeah, it's just be nice to people.
Yeah, exactly.
And treat people with respect.
Yeah, I think more understanding and respect goes a long way, and I think we can all learn from that. And we all fail at it. I fail at it every day, but I try to be better about it.
And we're all fighting our own fights as well. In terms of me, I've used the word privilege a lot of time, which I know annoys some people, but it's true. Like, I'm incredibly privileged. I'm very lucky in my life and career and everything, and the nature of the context of my birth. I'm lucky in lots of specific ways. So for me, as a liberal, it's abstracted, right? I'm not near the problems that I'm worrying about. And then there are other people who are, in terrible situations, who are, as I said, fighting for their lives in lots of different ways. So, and we're all just talking to each other in 140 characters on Twitter.
Right, exactly.
So it doesn't, I don't think the way we all communicate helps necessarily. So I take people seriously and respect them, I think. And taking people seriously and assuming good faith in most cases, I think is a great step as well.
Mike, let's segue into then, you are an indie game developer, having made 2 very successful independent games.
That's very kind of you.
Well, the market has spoken, hasn't it?
As they tend to do.
Yes. And we're talking, of course, about Thomas Was Alone and then Volume. I'm curious. I've been asking a few of the guests I've had this week about what they think about the independent gaming scene and how things are going.
It's all wonderful and perfect. Yeah, everything's fine.
What is the nature of it? I feel like it's evolved so very much since. Really it came to the word indie really came to prominence with, in my mind, Xbox Live Arcade back in the day, the Geometry Wars of the world and whatnot, and then on a Shadow Complex and Limbo. What is that market like now? I mean, you have success, so you have attention, right? Like you can, great. Right? Exactly. And is it becoming more difficult for someone to break in now, or is it becoming easier?
Yeah. I think so. I mean, it's like the thing that you always get asked, like, what's your top tip to an indie to be successful? Release your game in 2012. That's like my first bit of advice, because that's when Thomas Was Alone came out. And Thomas Was Alone, just to give an example to your audience, there's probably people watching this that weren't actively playing games during that period, which makes me feel terrible. But you had kind of the 2D Boys stuff was hitting, so World of Goo. You had Limbo and Braid. Those were I think those were all in 2011. No, actually, I think in some of those cases a bit earlier. But 2012, when Thomas came out, we came out in the middle of the year. I came out on a website called Desura that no one had heard of because I couldn't get on Steam. Back then, Steam, you could not get on unless you knew the right people. And I definitely didn't know the right people. Yeah. Well, yeah. And it sold like 5 copies. But fortunately, I knew one guy who had his game on Steam, so I begged him to please just send this zip file to your friend at Valve and let's see. And somehow managed to get on, and it still took 6 months. So it came out November of 2012. And Thomas Was Alone, which for your audience who don't know, literally rectangles jumping around, was on the front page of Steam for 2 weeks. And that's how I have a career now.
Yeah.
So it's that weird thing where I look back at that and it's like, I do think a lot, because a lot of people try to release games like Thomas Was Alone or of kind of similar scope to Thomas Was Alone nowadays. And if they're lucky, they're a small icon on the front page of Steam for 20 minutes. And I think about what if Thomas Was Alone had never come out and I released that now? It wouldn't stand a chance. It would absolutely be missed. Now, I'm proud of Thomas Was Alone. I think Thomas Was Alone's a good game, but it wouldn't have had a chance. It wouldn't have been found. Thomas Was Alone needed certain people to find it and go, no, this value here. This actually has some stuff in it that's worth your time. And I think those people aren't finding Thomas Was Alone now, or games like it. I'm sure there's games coming out, indie games that are coming out that are missed, and it's a shame. It's a really tough space. I would not want to be kind of a developer releasing my first game nowadays, and I see people doing that. I follow a lot of people on Twitter, and I kind of keep an eye on kind of younger devs who are making their first thing, and retweeting them when I can when they put something cool up and stuff like that. But like, it's a struggle. It's a real challenge, and you see great games come out and just disappear. I do think it's somewhat the perspective on it's somewhat warped because of Steam's absolute focus and the fact that Steam has been the absolute focus for so many years. I think we forget that places like Dezura existed. These websites that sold indie games that could not get onto Steam. So there were lots of games being made and coming out every year. Those stats you see about Valve, like, more games have come out in the last 2 minutes than came out 5 years previous or whatever those charts are. Like, those games were coming out. I was one of those games. But just you weren't hearing about them because you didn't go to those websites, And I think the difference now is, yes, they're all coming onto Steam, and they are taking up space in there. But it's a weird thing where I don't want them to stop being able to make their game come out on Steam. As a developer, every developer sees themselves in that first game. They go, well, I was there, and fortunately I got lucky and made it through. But you don't want to kind of pull up the ladder behind yourself.
Sure.
But I totally understand the consumer perspective of, I can't find games.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of I've gotten a lot of interesting feedback. Obviously, Adam Boyce took great umbrage with that particular thing when I interviewed him, but someone like Dan Edelman had a more moderate perspective on it, having worked on XBLA and WiiWare and all of that kind of stuff. Because my perspective is simply, not that a person doesn't have a right to make a game and to sell it, but about the intelligence of platform holders to put everything that's possible on their platform, and how that dilutes the value of it, and how people don't trust what they're buying anymore. If PlayStation Network curated in some effective way, then people would be more confident, and I believe would spend more money there, and they'd make more money with fewer games.
That's an interesting question, because if you look, it's a tough one. I'm not sure I agree with your feeling there. Like, I think for a long time we've equated limit of choice to quality, and definitely, like, because it was such a laborious process to release a video game 10 years ago. When I worked on some like original Xbox Live games, right, with working at a company in the UK, and it was laborious, like getting that game onto the platform. Whereas now, I mean, I joke, but it genuinely happened that our Google project we released towards the end of last year, I accidentally launched it a month early. I clicked the button and it came out, and it was out for about 2 hours, and I managed to like cancel it, like pull it back down. Unfortunately, like, no one cared, but like, these kind of that's you can release a game by accident nowadays, which is astonishing.
Right.
But I'm not sure that platform curation is necessarily the only solution to that. I think, I would equate it to like TV. TV fills its airwaves with stuff to see what works, see what doesn't work, see what finds an audience, see what doesn't find an audience, and then relies on secondary curation through traditionally like newspaper reviewers or like, word of mouth, largely, and obviously increasingly important now, word of mouth, to kind of let people find the good stuff, advertising as well, obviously kind of focusing on the stuff. If I was a platform holder, my fear would be that if I do the kind of curation you're talking about, I'm not going to get Thomas Was Alone on my platform. Thomas Was Alone only got onto PlayStation platforms, I can probably say this has been long enough now, because it came out on Vita. It was part of the Vita policy, and Vita was hungry for games. So you could kind of get into Vita, and then we got onto PlayStation 4 as a result of that, but we got in because of the hunger for games there, and then had big success on the platform and a great relationship with Sony ever since, and we've done some cool stuff with them. But there is a real danger. If you close that door, you are going to lose people. You are going to miss stuff. So as a platform holder, your choices are: do I close that door, or do I swing that door wide open and then do everything I can to keep this store alive. There are definitely like examples, and again, I don't shit on other people's games, but like not publicly anyway. But like there are games that have come out on PlayStation, notably in the last few months, that you look at and you go, how did this? Because I know the criteria of Sony tests.
I know what game you're talking about.
Yeah. So you wonder how that got through when you're fighting to get an icon the right size so that it gets through the tests and manages to scale up into the platform live. It's tricky, man. I think there's arguments both ways, and it's as a developer who's made the Rectangle game that really needed that chance. I don't know. I mean, the counter argument to that was Thomas Was Alone didn't get to Steam until a human being at Valve booted it, played probably the first 20 minutes, went, oh no, it's a video game. Oh, this is cool. Okay, there's value in this. So you could make that argument that like, well, you could have, human curators doing these jobs.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of my plan, right? Or my proposal, which is to have human curators. Not they don't have to play the whole game, but I would assume that if there was a jury of 12 people at Sony that all booted up Thomas Was Alone and played it for 20 minutes, they would vote 12-0 to put it on the store because it's
incredibly optimistic.
Well, just because I don't think they have to be the curator of being like this game. My only question, and it's an amorphous question that suggests that there's some sort of objectivity in judging a game, which I don't know if exists, is does this game belong here, and is it for someone? Is it reasonable that someone wants this game? And I think that they would all be like, yes. It's a some sort of puzzle platform or whatever that like, as opposed to Life of Black Tiger or whatever these games are that are coming out that I'm like, this game looks fucking atrocious. Or the games that are stealing assets, or the games that are
if people are stealing assets.
I mean, that happened on PSN a few months ago, and I couldn't believe it. That a game was actually uploaded with like completely stolen shit in it.
Really?
And
I won't comment, but tell me what that story was.
It was some sort. I wish I remember the name. I'll email you the name. I have to look it up, and I'm not sure if it's still up or not. But it was just in the drop posting like that they do on PlayStation Blog, and then it went up, and I was just reading slowly, and people were tweeting at me, and you saw it on Gaff, I think, where they'd be like, "This game, I fucking forget the name of it. That like it's stolen assets." And somehow got through certification, which to my mind is like, well, that was a harbinger to me. It was like an omen of like this. We're crossing a path, we're going through the looking glass now with PSN, where this place should be a little more treated a little more. Sacred's a weird word, but like what happened to the App Store is not good, and what's happening to Steam, I think, is also not good. And so that someone has to stand on the mount.
To do something.
Yeah, exactly. And be like, no. Just because your game does exist doesn't mean we want it. And I think that that's like a reasonable thing for a platform holder to say, like, we don't want it.
For sure. No, it's the freedom of speech argument, isn't it? Is you have freedom of speech, but you don't have freedom of a stage and lighting and access to
a private market.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, these are all corporations. So like, yeah, they have absolute freedom to say no to people. My fear is still, though, something gets missed because, I mean, to use your example there where you were like, well, it's a puzzle platform. We know those are interesting, blah, blah. But at some point, puzzle platformers weren't a thing, Admittedly, I was ripping off genres that existed long before my birth. But like, there will be a something, or even like, just an example of like, games like Minecraft, say, where I played the first beta of that. It was horrible.
That's the example everyone uses. But
then I guess your argument would be that Minecraft can exist as it did, completely off over here until it gets good, and then they'll notice. That's your argument.
Yeah, I think so, because I think that
they lost money, but they've lost money doing that, right? They've lost the lead on that.
I think that I don't remember. I don't even remember if it's on or off the record at this point, so I don't want. But I think significant people passed on Minecraft. Like that's like a common thing that people have lost. Therefore, have lost billions.
I imagine it's a lot of people's pub story about how they turned down
exactly.
Minecraft.
I don't even know like who told me this shit anymore, so I don't want to talk too deeply about it.
It's every developer's dream that someone somewhere who once said no to their project will then feel bad about it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the daydream every developer.
And Notch has billions of dollars, and Microsoft obviously is kind of the winner there. But yeah, I think that Minecraft is an interesting example because it's so strange and it's so new. It's almost too new. It was ahead of its time. They didn't understand what it was until it got into the audience. It's 120 million units sold. It is easily the best-selling game of all time. So as long as you don't count the Tetris roll-up, which I fucking hate, where they're like, we sold 500 million copies of Tetris. I'm like these are like 45 versions of Tetris, so I'm not really going to count that. But Yeah, so I agree with you. I think that but the answer is it's risk reward, right? Like everything has an upside and a downside. Sure. Is the upside to curating something like PlayStation Network or Xbox Live Arcade, and making sure that the quality of games is just a little higher and people can trust that market more and find games easier and all that kind of stuff, worth the risk of missing the occasional game, even though I don't believe that it would happen.
No, it's true, and I totally get what you're saying. What's weird to me is I didn't know that these platforms were as open as they are. I think that's something that's very recent, right?
It is.
It's like
it's a phenomenon of this generation. I think
because I've certainly, I mean, I had to go into a room and pitch volume to Sony and say, this is the game we're making, can we be on PlayStation, please? Like that was definitely a conversation, a physical, across a desk like this kind of conversation I had to have. It's a very short meeting, which was nice.
I'm sure.
A little boast there. I apologize. My first of the
You earned it. You earned it.
I earned it. We've been here a little while. It's fine. I'm allowed to boast. But yeah, like so it's weird. It's weird to me, like because Steam has definitely been very open for a while. Weirdly, though, Greenlight is a really interesting use case for the dangers of automation, right? Because Greenlight was an immensely, I mean, they're getting rid of it now, but it was an immensely gameable system. There were companies set up that would get your game through Greenlight for you, like third-party companies who worked out how to game the numbers. Which I guess backs up your argument a little of kind of, human beings are harder to game. They can still be gamed, but like there are games stuck in Greenlight right now that I look at and go, yeah, I'd buy that, I'd play that, I want to play that, and they just can't get the votes because it's super niche or weird or whatever. But certainly more valuable than the game that's paid $30 to this company to send some bots or whatever it is that they do to vote for things. I don't know if that's how they do it, but whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever they do.
Some untoward.
There's some cheekiness going on. Would be the polite way. I just need to watch more Jim Sterling videos and learn all their tricks. But like it's a weird one, man. Because the other problem is, again, let's say the word privilege again, because it's been my catchphrase for this conversation. But like, I'm not going to have a problem getting my game onto platforms. I might have a problem getting platforms to roll out the red carpet and do everything if they don't dig a game. Sure, that's that. But in terms of like, will I ever again have a problem releasing my game? I'd have to really mess up. I've had to have said something incredibly offensive at some point in this conversation to burn that bridge. I don't think I have. But like, so I feel very awkward about like suggesting. I'm interested. What was Boyce's kind of argument against you? What was his? Well,
his whole thing is just that. Well, he made a staunch argument similar to the one you're making about what if we miss something, but also kind of judging the because I was talking about it from a critical standpoint. We always stress the subjectivity of game criticism, but my question is simply: is there a small sliver of the pie, that is objective? That like when you look at it,
objectively say this is not a video game,
right? Or can you objectively say like this game sucks, and is that like ubiquitously true for enough people
that it would be
that it's
relevant.
Actually that it's true, right? Like, and I don't want to pick on because I don't know the people, but that Life of Black Tiger game that was making the rounds. I don't know if you saw that trailer on PSN. Fucking terrible. Right? Like, and
when someone somewhere, right? That's what they've been waiting for.
The sad thing is that game probably sold 10,000 copies
just because of the conversation.
Yep. Yeah. And maybe that was the whole thing to begin with. But so my question is simply: is there a sliver of objectivity to say, and that's why I didn't want it to be one person or two people. I want it to be like a jury, like a people that like this is their job. They boot up the games, they get the games. They don't have to play all the way through them, but they just play them for a little while. And the question simply is this up to snuff in some sort of way for someone? And I know the answer, I guess, would be for everyone would be yes. But my question, my answer to this would be like, some of these games are selling 400 copies. At some point, this is actually costing Sony more money to put through certification and deal with emails and uploading and servicing this game.
And
than they're actually
which
making
is something
back.
that people, the players often aren't aware of, that like it's not just an upload, especially with consoles. You have You're going to meetings with these people. You're talking to them, or even if you're not physically kind of meeting them. Yeah, like I say, there's emails back and forth. There's QA departments. It's a massive QA, walls and walls of talented people just checking our stuff and finding every mistake we made. I love those people because they get to decide when my game comes out. But yeah, like. There is, like you say, there's cost involved in every game they release. There is a cost to the platform holder, but it's an interesting one, man. Yeah, I will always err on the side of it's again liberalism, right? Like I'm liberal in my approach to storefronts, but I do completely feel that this shouldn't be a consumer problem. I think that's definitely some common ground in terms of like you as a consumer should be able to find awesome games very quickly. The visibility conversation is fascinating to me because visibility developers often talk about visibility, but the problem with visibility is it is a finite resource. So whenever I talk about I want my games to have more visibility, I'm taking visibility from someone else. There's a way that visibility is spoken about in the industry of like how do you get your game more visibility? How do you push for visibility? How do you get your game in front of people? And it's not a limitless resource. Your attention as a gamer is not a limitless resource. So if you're seeing ad after ad for the new Mike Bithell game, then you're going to miss stuff. You're going to not see stuff. And I think that we all have to kind of be a bit more honest about that and kind of accept, no, that's what we're doing. Where we are going to make some things more visible, some things less visible. And try and work out how to do that well. I like Valve's approach in terms of trying to curate that and kind of in terms of using AI or using correlation lists. But computers are crap at this. Like I landed, I got into my hotel in San Francisco after being in Vegas for a week, booted up my email client. What did I see? An ad for the hotel I just left. Because the algorithm saw me, I guess, searching for map directions in the cab for like where am I going again kind of thing,
right?
And put up an ad. AIs are terrible at this right now. Like they'll get better presumably, but like right now, you're right. Humans are always going to be better at this. It's honestly, I wonder if this is a responsibility that's shifting more and more to people like yourself, people who are talking publicly about games.
It could be because
you're not being paid by the platform holders or the developers for that service you're providing. So it's a weird kind of.
I have no horse in the race, so I guess they could look at it as being the most honest that you can possibly be because I don't make any money or lose any money based on the decisions you make.
Sure, but my point is it's outsourcing without payment. So it's this. That was one of the things that I think has been a big part of just web culture in general. Of kind of let's just crowdsource the answers to these questions and the discussion. It's work. It's labor. If you know that let's say with games, I think this is probably actually true of games. Is there is an enormous number of people who are playing everything and highlighting good stuff. I don't think it's a full meritocracy. I do think stuff gets lost. And I think it's also easier for people like myself who have visibility to get into the position like, I'm going to send you guys my next game at some point and you're going to open the email. And that's something that not every developer can get that, and that's
right.
just because of that visibility. It's not a meritocracy. But I do think that a lot of people out there are doing this curation job, and I'm not sure that's fair. I'm not sure that it's fair that corporations and myself rely on the community to find the good stuff and tell each other about the good stuff. That should sort of be our jobs as well. We should take maybe a bit more responsibility for that. But I think everything just keeps getting better, and hopefully eventually this solves. My ideal solution would be everything gets on the platforms, or not everything, but like the kinds of levels that we currently have. Not absolutely everything. Like there should be checks to make sure that it's not a virus and that it runs and that it's not breaking the law in some way.
Right.
But then you don't see it. Unless it's good.
Right.
And that's a hard thing. I've just described something. It sounds so absolutely easy when I say it like that, but in reality, probably more complex.
So let's quantify that. The most extreme is the App Store. Do you think that the App Store is too extreme? 750,000 games. Half of which apparently you can cut out of the marketplace and affect the bottom line 0%, according to.
So that's an interesting one, and there's a very interesting wrinkle with the App Store in particular that you pay money to be able to develop a game for the App Store. And I do remember reading a stat once, I don't know if this is true, but the stat that like Apple makes more money from the $100 they're getting from every developer on the App Store than they get from their cut of sales of games.
Sure, I'm sure on average that's absolutely true.
I for most developers, as you say, like the vast majority, I don't think it's a problem that there are 750,000 games on there. I think it's a problem if you go on the App Store and can't find the game. I think it's fine for 750,000 games to be there. If I were able to give the advice to 750,000 people who made those games, I would say maybe find another place to sell your wares. Right. Maybe this little corner of this mega store is not the best place for you to find an audience. One of my big things with indie games is if you look historically at where indie games have had our booms, it's always been where no one else is. It's always been that burst around something new. So, everyone, the things like Doodle Jump with the I think the iPhone 3 was the first one with the App Store. Like absolutely blew the doors off because there was no one else there. Within 6 months, everyone rushes in, and it's hard to get seen anymore.
But aren't you kind of through the back door making the argument for why we don't want this to happen to PlayStation Network and Xbox Live then? Because these marketplaces will also be raised and destroyed, and I don't mean raised R-A-I-S-D-E, I mean R-A-Z-E-D. And destroyed, and then you'll have to move on to the next market. In other words, like, shouldn't someone at some point build the wall between? Well, I mean, that's interesting reference.
We're going back to the first topic.
Yeah, exactly. But so should someone build some sort of gate that says like, we've watched the destruction of markets. I mean, we watched the destruction of the Atari market in 82, 83 for actually the same reason. It just was a different thing. Quaker Oats was making video games for Atari.
It depends if you're a dodo or an ecosystem. It depends what level we're talking about. So having the indie space, so if we assume like there's these little islands of like indies on console X, indies on PC, indies on mobile, indies on console Y. You can't say console X because obviously that's a console. Right. But like, if we assume that these are all little populations and there's booms in different places. You saw this with VR. So VR, it should be, I mean, there was lots of money in VR. If you wanted to develop a game in VR, you could go and pitch to people who needed games on their VR platforms and you could get funding. So you saw a lot of indies jump into VR. And that was a big boom area. And now there is not so much money in some areas because of that. So people are moving elsewhere. So is the indie VR failing? No, it had a boom and it will come back. I think the population moves around. I don't think though. I think, and they go back, they go away, they come back. If you look at Xbox Live, right, you had a massive boom for indie games there, and as you said, some absolute classics came out of that. And then you see kind of that not working so well towards the end of the lifespan necessarily, and then it coming back, and then go. Basically, my point is, yes, there will be good times and bad times in each area, but I don't think you can. That would be like making a console that lasts forever. Of course, that would be wonderful if you could make a console that would just this console is going to be under your TV for 20 years. That's a brilliant business idea. Right. That would be amazing. But I think the realities of how people flow and how money, especially investment, does flow. Investment is very, very fast to move to different places. Incredibly fast. Because they're chasing the boom. They're not chasing the sustainable, comfortable. Right. Hey, we all get paid.
They want
and we
the
get
windfall.
to make future games. They want the windfall.
Right.
And crucially, usually, the larger population of investors is just behind that first pile because you have the first investor who takes a punt on something and then massively pays off. And then they go to the conference where there's like 200 people watching and say, "Hey guys, it's all about chickens. The chickens, that's the big investment. Buy chickens. And then everyone buys chickens, which causes the big pile in. And no one makes any money. And you see this. I've been in the industry just long enough. I mean, I made Facebook games for 2 years. I've seen this cycle play out a million times. I don't think it's a solvable problem. I think it's just how people and money works in the games industry. So yeah, maybe console indie games are about to get super oversubscribed. But there'll be something else opens up where indies can find another opportunity. And that would be my advice to any indies watching: is just look at where no one is. Look at the audience who are crying out for, please, can we get some video games? Because that's probably where you could do very well right now. But be quick with it because probably other people are going to notice that and they're going to jump in. So it's
in a strange way, it's such a nerdy reference, but I've been reading about the Alaskan and California gold rushes and how people that hurt, like where the news took a couple months to get from San Francisco to New York City and really start to by the time the people got to California from New York City, it was over.
I'll say read in the papers, gold.
Yeah,
okay.
And then they go, and a lot of people lost everything because they were too late. And it seems like you're making a similar argument. Not that they're going to lose their shirts like the frontiersmen did, but they're too late to market.
I mean, some people get quite close to it with games. Unfortunately, we've all overinvested in a vanity project. It's definitely happened.
I want to ask you this last question to try to further quantify things, because I think Steam is trying to deal, and getting rid of Greenlight and bringing in this new kind of access system that they're doing. Steam Direct, I think. Now the question is like, how much money should a developer have to pay to get their game on? And I know that the answer vacillates from very small to almost nothing, or $100 to $5,000 or more, $10,000.
That's the number they floated publicly, right? They were talking between 100 and 5,000.
What do you think the appropriate part in the scale is? Because to me, like, my first instinct when I heard the $5,000 number was like, that's perfect and maybe even too low. Specifically because I'm like, well, and this goes back to the gatekeeping.
So 5,000 for you is the number,
right? I think that would be a reasonable number because my whole thing is like, yeah, $5,000 is a lot of money. A lot of people can't reach into their wallet or their bank account and pull out $5,000 to be like, I'm going to do this for a chance at something that might not pay off. But my whole thing was like, well, this will stop. Like, this actually is a great natural gatekeeper without any bit one involved being like, I'm going to make, in my spare time, I'm going to download Unity and use Unity tools and buy some assets on the store and put up this bullshit game. Oh, I have to pay $5,000 to get this thing on? Never mind.
Don't bother.
You know, but if you really believed in it, but this comes up to the same problem, to be fair, what you were saying with the Minecrafts of the world, when you look at them and you're like, I don't know what this is and I don't want this, which is to say like, wow, my game really is good, but I don't have $5,000.
But your argument there would be wait till Minecraft makes 5,000 elsewhere and then bring it on, right?
Right, I suppose so. I mean, so what is the right price for you? Because I assume it's going to be somewhere
my
on the
first
lower
question,
end.
yeah, I mean, well, I'm liberal. I think it should be like, they should pay you £20. No. I mean, the first thing to say is if it's 5,000, then you never get Thomas Was Alone. Because Tom, my financial situation, it's important to point this out. Like, Thomas Was Alone. I made it while working I was a lead designer I was making Facebook games at the time in London, which is a very expensive city. It's not San Francisco expensive, but it's expensive. Right. So I was doing that job, and I was living literally. I was basically spending my salary. I think lots of people live that way, right? Got my salary end of the month, and I would just last to the end of the month. And so I was literally, every penny was accounted for in just living and seeing friends and, you know, doing all the stuff we spend on video games, obviously. So in terms of like, I literally went to the bank to try and get a loan to pay for the voice actor. That was the level I was at, where I needed to borrow, you know, a couple of £1,000 just to pay for the voice actor and the studio and all this stuff. And that was a voice actor who was going out of their way to be reasonable and cheap because, you know, really good guy who I love working with. I didn't in the end. I found, you know, this was the first rise of Kickstarter. So I managed to use that to raise a couple of £1,000, which was that was the most amazing amount of money because that's what I needed. So I guess that's my point is, I don't think there is a number. I think that's a real challenge that Valve have, is that money is a terrible metric for the quality of the game that's under consideration. First off, international. We're in an international games industry. The value of $100 here the value of $100 here versus the value of $100 elsewhere in America is a big variation. Right. The second you're thinking about Russian developers, like when you sell a game internationally, you know, you see these numbers because you price your game according to the market. My games are significantly, like, tiny percentages cheaper. If you go to Russia with your laptop, buy Thomas Was Alone, you'll get a great deal. But like, and that's because, you know, money is not a stable thing. A Starbucks coffee, I'm sure someone's done this online. Look up like what a Starbucks coffee costs in each country of the world. It's massive variation. And if you look at a lot of the exciting, brilliant games that are happening now, a lot of them are coming from countries that where money has, you know, money is harder to come by. So that's a problem. I think also the other thing is personal wealth is not a metric to the quality of what you've made. Your $5,000. There are kids right now who are spending $100 to post a joke on Greenlight, and you know, God bless. I swear half it's just Jim Sterling posting up stuff for his videos, but like some of this stuff where it's like MS Paint and just like laughable, like comedy bad, right? They're trolling. They're having, for them, $100 is an amount of money that they can afford to spend on a dumb joke. There are people who will spend $5,000 on a dumb joke. That I don't think there is. I don't think there's money. You know, wealth is something that distributes weirdly. Your guy who is scrimping and saving to find $10 for food that night might be making a much better game, and honestly, probably is. Like, they're making interesting games at least. Like, so for me, money is not a valuable metric. I almost wonder. The kind of the nerd in me is like, are there other metrics? Is there time? Could we make someone sit for like I know this is very stupid and hippy dippy, but like, could we somehow force people to sit and watch a 10-hour video? And if they sit and watch the 10-hour video and can answer 5 questions about the video, then they can get on Steam. Because time is much more of a relative value. Time is something that most people value equally, right? Like 10 hours to me as someone who's very financially comfortable because of the job I do, is probably worth about 10 hours to someone. But then you start going, well, okay, what about developers with children? They obviously have less time. You know, so there's no metric that says And that's the challenge here, because obviously Valve is they're lovely people at Valve, but they're looking for a number that's a way of solving this with numbers. And humans are, messy and biological. Like, it's a very tough thing to. So I don't think there is a number. That's my kind of contention. And if there isn't a number, should there even be a number? But if there isn't a number, App Store.
It's a conundrum, and
it really is. I'm not smart enough to solve it. That's the problem.
Me neither.
I'll just make video games. That's much easier.
I'll just make videos about video games, which is
even
even worse. Well, Mike, I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for taking the time out of GDC to come talk to us. I hope you found it enjoyable. I certainly did. Cool. Please support Mike Bithell. Buy his games, Thomas Was Alone and Volume, available on all sorts of different platforms.
Too many, if anything.
Well, too many are not enough. Again, we have a conundrum.
Well, God, so there we are. Another hour.
And you can follow him on Twitter at Mike Bithell, Bithell. Hope to see you next time. Will you be at E3?
That depends on how well my Dice and GDC turn out to have been.
Well, we will keep our fingers crossed for you and wish you all the greatest of success. We'll see you next time. Thank you for your support. I hope you enjoyed the video. Bye.